Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about the Chester play of the Shepherds. So I always loved shepherd plays in medieval cycle plays, whether that's the Wakefield cycle or the Townley manuscripts, sorry. Whether that's the York cycle, whatever it is. I always love shepherds plays because they give us really, really interesting insights. Not so much into the Bible or Bible stories, but into the world of day-to-day life for medieval people. And this is especially true with English cycles, like the Chester cycle, the York cycle, the Wakefield cycle. Because we don't know that much about the lives of day-to-day people throughout most of history, in part because literacy rates were incredibly low, and so there were very few written records that survived from the perspectives of day-to-day people up until the 20th century, the 19th century, at the earliest, where we start to get widespread literacy. And a lot of what does survive is writing from relatively privileged people within societies, and we can't be 100% sure how accurate those depictions are. But when we come to something like the cycle plays, which is really a people's theater, these are things that, when you have figures like the shepherds, they're people that would have been incredibly familiar to medieval audiences, especially in northern England, in places like Chester and York and Wakefield, or in western England, because wool was a massive part of the English economy. It was huge. And so you had tons of shepherds. And so in places like Chester, like York, like Wakefield, where you had these major shepherding communities, these people would see themselves in the biblical shepherds, right? In case this wasn't clear, right? When I talk about the shepherds, these are the shepherds who, in one of the Gospels, and I forget which one off the top of my head, but in one of the Gospels, shepherds go to see the infant Jesus at his nativity, right? This is the story that's depicted here. But these are clearly not first century Levantine shepherds, right? These are people clearly not living in a desert climate, clearly not ancient Jewish shepherds. These are medieval, or in this case, late medieval or early modern, because I think that this play is first documented in around 1515. So late medieval, early modern English shepherds. And there are, in fact, references to London, to rivers around Chester, to villages around Chester. So clearly these are local shepherds, right? But because this is and that's an important component of it, that this be localized in that way, and that the shepherding culture of these characters is immediately identifiable by audiences, because these plays, cycle plays, functioned as a kind of what's the Althusserian term? Ideological state apparatus and a pedagogical tool, right? So they taught people Bible stories, but they did so in such a way that it encouraged conformity with the structures and the practices of the church. So it was quite important for these plays to have maximum effect, that audiences would identify with the characters, that they would identify with these shepherds. And so the shepherds express contemporary experiences, perspectives, etc., etc. And we have this carnivalesque excess to these characters that really works quite well in terms of getting audience members on board with them, because there's that sort of joy and excess of the carnivalesque. And the carnivalesque for medieval people, this was basically a sort of like, these were spaces in which the normal privations of day-to-day life were abandoned in favor of feasting, of drinking, of fighting, in which authority was challenged or inverted, etc., right? So we get these things. So we start out with the first shepherd, whose name is Henkin. And he opens basically with this description of his suffering and challenges that he faces as a shepherd. So he says here, "On wolds have I walked wild, under busks my bower to build, from stiff storms my sheep to shield, my seemly weathers to save, from comely Conway unto Clyde." Those are both local to Chester. Conway was a village, Clyde was the River Clyde, right? Under telds them to hide, a better shepherd on no side no earthly man may have, for with walking weary I have me wrought, beside the sick my sheep I sought, my taintful tops are in thought, them to save and heal from the shrewd scab that sought, or the rot it were, or the rot if it were wrought, if the cough had them caught, of it I could them heal. So basically what he's saying here is, I've been suffering, I've been living outside, it's cold, it's wet, it's rainy, it's England. I've been camping under bushes, and I've been trying to protect my sheep. And then he transitions to, I have sick sheep, and I need to go and get my herbs and medicines so that I can heal them. And this is important for a couple of reasons. One is, again, that sort of seeing for rural English people in the early modern or late medieval period to see themselves represented in these characters and to identify with these shepherds means that they will identify with these characters who are going to become devotees of Christ. And so that we start with this identification of like, oh, yeah, I also have experienced that, right? I have been taking care of my sheep. We also have this identification of the shepherd with the healer, right? The shepherd who protects the flock and he heals the flock. And this, of course, has a theological component to it because we have this recurring thematic of Christ the shepherd who protects his flock of believers, right? And so again, we have those associations that allow the shepherding community that is the audience for the Chester cycle to identify with these holy figures. We then have a set of things that occur that are very much carnivalesque. And again, we're talking about eating, drinking, the lower body, right? Getting into fights, scatological humor, because the three shepherds, whose names are Henkin, Harvey, and Tudd, they sit down, but they're in the actual thing, they're just called first, second, and third shepherd. So they sit down, and we have this 20-plus line description of the food that they are eating as part of this feast, right? So they decide that they're going to have this feast, they're going to share all their food between them, and we get these descriptions, right? So the second shepherd says, he sort of sets this up, and he goes into this list of food. Here is bread, this day was bacon, onions, garlic, and leeks, butter that was bought in Blaken, which I guess was a town in the area, and green cheese that will grease well your cheeks. The third shepherd says, and here ale of Halton I have, another town in the area, and hot meat I had to my hire, a pudding may no man deprave, and a jannock of Lancastershire. And lo, here a sheep's head soused in ale, and a grain to lay on the green, and sour milk. My wife had obtained a noble supper, as is well seen. Or as well is seen, sorry. The first shepherd says, now will I cast off my cloak, and put on it part of my livery, put out that I have in my poke, and a pig's foot from pudding's puree. The third shepherd says, abide, fellows, and ye shall see here this hot meat, we serve in it here, gambins and other good meat in fair, pudding with a prick in the end. The first shepherd says, my satchel to shake out, to shepherds am I not ashamed, and this tongue pared round about, with my teeth it shall be attained. They later talk about drinking from bottles, not entirely clear what exactly they're drinking, probably some version of cider or ale. But I mean, again, this is over 20 lines devoted to describing this food. So there's no real purpose. There's no real dramaturgical reason to do it, except that it is about, again, this carnivalesque ethos that was incredibly popular in the medieval period, right? So the enjoyment of a feast, of the idea of bounty being associated with these shepherds who are associated with Christ, both through the sort of metaphor of Christ as shepherd, that's a simile in that case, but Christ the shepherd would be the metaphorical version. Christ as shepherd would be the simile, but you entirely take my meaning, right? So they're associated with Christ because Christ is figured as shepherd really, really often. But they're also associated with Christ because we know within the Bible story that these are the shepherds who will see the star, follow it to Bethlehem, and they will do homage to the baby Jesus. So we get this eating and this drinking. We then get this character named Troll, or Trowel, or Trolle, Trowle. I'm going to call him Troll because I think that's the most delightful pronunciation of what I can sort of figure out here, right? So Troll is their assistant. And they have not initially invited him to this feast, but they basically are, they then sort of call him to come and eat the leftovers. And Troll is basically like, you guys shut up, I'm going to sit here drinking, because that's what I want to do. And they're basically like, no, come over here, eat this food. And he's like, no. And what he says here is, therefore meat, if I may, of your dighting today will I not by no way, till I have my wage. I wend to have been gay, but see, so ragged is mine array, I pinches your pay to any poor page. So basically he is taking labor action here. So, yeah, hashtag Team Troll. Basically he's saying, you guys have not paid me enough, so I am not going to participate. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to drink my alcohol, I'm going to get drunk, and you guys can go suck an egg. They continue to sort of push him to come and eat, and finally Troll goes over and he's like, I'm going to fight you guys. And they basically, like, each of them in turn, the three shepherds in turn, wrestle Troll, and he throws them. He defeats them in these wrestling bouts. And basically each time he defeats one of them, he takes some of the food as part of his pay. And at some point he says, I think before he wrestles the third shepherd, he says, I'm going to beat you too. So he does a lot of sort of trash talking, as they do to him. And he says, the better in the boar as I have before of this Beauvert, basically I will beat you the way that I've beaten the previous ones. Yea, hope I more. I will get more food for defeating you. Keep well thy store for fear of a fart. So again, this is a very carnivalesque element. He is talking about because he's been eating during this physical activity, he's afraid he's going to fart, or he's looking forward to farting. Hard to tell. But basically, he's like, I will fart on you during this fight. So again, there's very sort of carnivalesque, grotesque elements to it, right? But all of it is funny, right? In performance, this is going to be incredibly hilarious, especially for medieval people who, again, I've talked about this in other videos about the cycle plays. Medieval people were much more comfortable with rude humor alongside sacred doctrine, sacred dogma in these plays. And indeed, we see this again in just a little bit, because after they have had these fights with Troll, the star appears and stuff really kicks into high gear, right? From a religious perspective. So basically they're sitting around, they're like, there's this crazy star. What does it mean? And then they hear angels sing, Gloria in excelsis Deo et in terra pax omnibus, I don't know, bone voluntatis, which is glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace to men of goodwill, right? So the angels sing this from off stage. And the shepherds don't know what it means because they don't speak Latin. So we have this sort of extended period where the shepherds are basically like, I think he said this word, and this is what it could mean. And it's this very sort of comic, ridiculous attempt to parse what this Latin means, which is probably not very funny for modern audiences, but at the time it probably would have been, because there was also this tradition of what's sometimes called schoolboy Latin, I think, where basically the idea is like it is bad Latin. It is Latin that is not correct, but it's a sort of comic translation of Latin into the vernacular. And schoolboys would do this all the time, right? Because in the medieval period, a basic component of schooling for anybody who went was to learn Latin. And so people would come up with these sort of ribald interpretations of Latin passages or whatever it is, right? So this was the thing. But basically, they eventually sort of come to the conclusion that they need to follow this star, go to Bethlehem. That's where Jesus is being born, and so they need to be there. So they decide they're going to walk from northwestern England to Bethlehem, which is a long trip. But they go. And after they have decided and started on their trip, an angel shows up and says, hey, you need to go to Bethlehem. And rather than being like, we're already on our way there, they say, that's a great idea. Don't look too closely at that because it is an inconsistency. But we get that, right? So then they show up, they go to Bethlehem, they see the baby Jesus. Mary and Joseph both give their stories in sort of exposition. They basically just tell the shepherds, here is what's going on. Mary's like, yeah, an angel appeared to me, said that I'm carrying the Savior, etc., etc. Joseph is like, I married her because an angel showed up and told me to, etc., etc., right? So that, again, we get this element that's not dramaturgically that interesting, but it serves a pedagogical purpose to teach these stories and the relationships between these characters to an audience that is largely illiterate and cannot read the Bible for themselves. After that, the shepherds, along with a group of boys who seem to be maybe Troll's friends but have thus far not actually shown up or done anything, all of them are basically like, hey, baby Jesus, I'm quite poor, but I can give you this garment or this bottle or this flute, whatever it is, right? Whatever thing that I have, the only thing that I basically have, I give to you because you are Jesus, right? So I want to show my devotion to you. I want to sacrifice of myself, the only thing that I, as a poor person, have to sacrifice. And then that sort of continually comes with the "please think of me at the judgment," right? So don't condemn me to hell. And then several of the shepherds are basically like after this, several of the shepherds are like, I'm done shepherding. I'm going to go and live in the desert as a hermit and devote myself to the adoration of Christ. So again, when you have these shepherds who are very much late medieval, early modern English shepherds, they are characters that the audience is going to identify with. And so when they say, I will sacrifice for Jesus or the church, as it sort of would later become, and as was the case in medieval England, and I will devote myself to prayer, religious dogma, whatever it is, that is encouraging audiences to do the same.